Hey, let's start making a ceramic origami bowl. What do you say? So we're going to need some clay, of course, and we're going to need a few other things. The rolling pin, the rolling guides. You're going to need some sort of water. You might have a cup of water handy. I'm going to have a little bit of water involved with a damp sponge here. That way, if I need to add a little bit to the surface, that's ready to go. And you need something to roll your clay onto. So when you're taking notes on slab building, there are a bunch of different options. One option, the first one, was a canvas, and that's not something that I would assume that everybody has. Canvas is a type of fabric. It's just not stretchy. It works great for rolling on clay because it doesn't stretch. And so if you happen to have any sort of fabric that doesn't stretch, you could use a piece of fabric. So I'm going to use a canvas here. You also have the options of using different kinds of paper, which does work. It's very one-time usage. And so you'll use it, and then what will happen is it'll get all messed up. Some of it will stick to your clay. You can also use certain kinds of wood. Now, the smooth surface of your boards is not a good surface. The smooth surface of the table is not a good surface. If it's unfinished wood or porous, not sealed, that can work. The back of your board can work because it's more porous. It's not as smooth. Problem with the board is it's kind of limiting on how small you go. And so if I'm doing something that's only this big, I could probably get away with it. But once I start going larger, I'm going to have some issues. So it'd be nice to find something that you can use a few times over to roll onto. So I'm going to use the canvas for myself. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to press this flat. Now, people that don't put anything down first, if you do it directly onto a table, what ends up happening is everything looks good until it's time to start taking it off the table, and then you find it sticks quite a lot and can ruin your whole project. Now, one thing I know is fabrics and paper and anything that we're putting in between is going to soak up some water. So there's proof of it here. I can see that my fabric is a little bit wet there. And every time you do that, that means this just got a little bit drier. So be aware of that. The longer you work with this on top of a surface like this, the drier it gets. Not just because of time and air, but it's going to be sucking out the water like it's a sponge. So be aware of that. And so I'm going to start rolling this out. And I'm just going to start in the middle only. Just worry about only the middle. And then change directions as well. Now, I say the middle because when we get to the edges, it can stick a lot, and that can be a little bit of a problem. And so we'll see how to deal with that as well. So now when I'm getting to here, I'm going to peel off every once in a while. It allows me to keep on going a lot easier. If you were to let it stay on the surface, like in the case of this fabric here, what's going to happen is it just stops moving. It doesn't move very much. Every once in a while you do have to release it. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to have a very even, consistent thickness, and I'm going to use the rolling guides. Now these are exactly 1/4 inch, so that 1/4 inch, if I put it here, it means just kind of like a railroad track here. If I go along here and I do my roller along there, it's impossible for me to go any thinner than a 1/4 inch, unless it somehow gets off the roller and then can go down to the table. So I'm going to keep it close enough that I'm able to go like this. And I'm still working out from the middle, back and forth. And you shouldn't have any problems with it sticking to the roller if you're only doing the middle area. Now, before I go any farther, I want to make sure that I'm actually on pace to get this the right width. And right now, it's pretty good, but I can see the corners is where I'm a little bit worried. And so I want to make sure that I'm aiming for that. If I know these 4 areas need more, I'm going to see what happens if I roll this out. So a little bit more, and we'll try this a little bit more as well. So it seems like I'm going to have all 4 corners are going to get there. Now if you're barely there, or it's like just doesn't quite make it, it's worth redoing to get it so that way you have 1/4 inch everywhere. You don't want it to be 1/4 inch most of the places, and then there's a few thin spots. So I know I'm thick enough. I know it's wide enough, and I'm just going to go ahead and finish it. Now, the thing about the edges, you can roll the edges, but here's what you need to know. When you roll edges, all is well, and then all of a sudden, it can sometimes flip up on you and get stuck to the roller, like that. Very common. All you have to do is make sure that you're always rolling away from the middle. So if I go back and forth on the edge, that's where a lot of times you'll get it where it'll catch and just roll up with you. So I always roll away from the middle when you're doing your edges, and that won't happen either. I now have a nice slab of clay, which for a lot of the different projects that we do, I am able to do the slab to begin. Now, check it, double check it. So you're standing up when you're rolling, and I'm looking to see that it seems to be pretty even, and I have a bunch of bumps going on there, so I know it's not even. So I'm going to keep rolling it out. If nothing seems to be changing, lift it off, lay it back down again. No matter what material you're on, it just gives it a little bit more freedom to move, which then allows me to flat it out better. So, I am good to go on that. I certainly have a space in the middle that I can get the square cut out of, and then it's time to do it. Now, you can cut it with all sorts of different things. I don't want to use a sharp knife because I would probably cut right through to the table. And so the plastic knives you have are not really the best when it comes down to cutting out clay cleanly because the edge is so wide and the plastic sticks a lot. And so I like to use the card as my knife. So I'll go ahead and I'll just slice along there, paying attention to that line, trying to follow it all the way through. So when I peel away the extra pieces, you always want to be thinking about what are you up to with your clay. If you know you're not going to be using this and you just set it aside and it dries out, you're going to have some clay that you need to deal with later on to refresh. If you say, I don't need this right now, probably a good idea to put it in the bag. If you've acquired a spray bottle in the process of taking this class, I'd spray a little bit of water on there. If you don't have a spray bottle, you could always just take a little bit of water, kind of rub it onto one of them and stick them together. Just anything to make it so that later on you have some good clay to use. It's super frustrating when you are ready to work on your projects and your clay is just way too dried out to get the job done. So somehow adding water can be a good thing, but the key thing is pay attention to where you're putting these pieces. Are you just leaving them out to dry for an hour? Then later on you have some work to do. So added a little bit of water. I think I'm probably going to go add a little touch of water at the sink, and then I'm going to put it back in my bag so it'll be easier to use later on. All right, so one thing I can do is I can make the surface a little neater before I start cutting. I'm just going to take my damp sponge. Again, it's not super full of water. Like if I squeeze it really hard, I can probably make some of it come out, but generally it's just a little bit wet. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to take the card that I was using for cutting, and I'm just going to drag along it. I'm not pressing down very hard. It's going to smooth out that surface, and it's also going to compress the clay along there, which makes it stronger. You can do this on both sides of your clay, especially if you did it on something that leaves a texture. It'll eliminate that. I had a little bit of red clay that snuck into the other clay that we use, the white clay. And so I got these little stripes going on here, just by accident. Okay. Now, before I do any sort of cutting, I'm just going to check to make sure that my edges appear to be good. It'll be easier to fix this stuff now than later on, so I'm just going to go along, make it so that the edges are nice now. I'd rather do it so it's easier, personally. If you wait till the very end, it's more difficult, and there will be touch-ups you need to do at that point, so we may as well do the easy stuff now. I don't want those rough edges. Even along where I cut, I can see that, you know, I could go along there and rub that out with my finger. If it seems like it's making it worse, add a little bit of water to it. I like using the wet sponge to give myself a neat edge there. I want to get rid of that extra ridge that happens to be showing up right there. So now we're slab building. This is going to be falling into the category of soft slab building, where I start working with the slab while it's still soft and plastic like this. Later on, if we were to do things like making boxes where I want the walls to be straight up and not floppy, then I'm going to use this stiff slab method. So in the soft slab method, I'm ready to go. So I have my form, which is looking like a mess right now, but it got the job done of allowing me to see things on paper. Now, if it doesn't match perfectly, I could go along there and cut. I don't really trust myself with the paper necessarily to get that perfect, and so I could use my rolling guide. So I'm gonna take the rolling guide and just go right along the edge of the paper. That way I can push against it and it doesn't mess it up. So I can say one reason why it didn't match was because I didn't get it at the corner. All right, that's looking pretty good, but I can see I'm still messed up a little bit over in this corner. Stretch it out a little bit. Maybe I'll start there. And there it is. So now I'm gonna cut along here. Okay. Now, try not to ruin this completely here. I'm gonna go ahead and touch up the edges. Probably need to remove it off here for a moment to get these little pieces off. Touch up the edges. My sponge. Fix the corners now while I can. It's much easier to do that now. Now I'm ready to make the cuts. So I'm gonna line this up and use your cutting tool. I'm gonna keep using this card. I do make sure I clean it off before I use it. I don't want some dried clay to be making marks that I wasn't ready for. So I'm just gonna wipe off any wet spots there, the dry spots, the clay. I'm just gonna cut these outward. Now, if I'm doing a one-time thing here, I only want to make one of these, then it doesn't matter if I rip the template. Setting the paper on top of the clay is making it come apart a bit. All right, so now what I have, before I tear it, I'm gonna go ahead and I'm gonna make the marks where I need to make them. And so I'm gonna take my pencil and I wanna see roughly what's happening. So it's kind of going like right in here, and I'm eyeballing this. So somewhere about like this. So that's the area that I need to be scored. So it's kind of a little triangle. And then on the back side earlier, I had marked that as well. So I'm gonna see how that looks. Now with this one, I'm gonna need to flip this over, which can be a little tricky. Try not to mess it up in the process. But I'm gonna see where this one needs to be done. So this one looks like it's here to here, so it's gonna be kind of like here. Check it, yep. So I'm gonna go here to here, and then keep doing that. Now before I flip it, I'm gonna go ahead and put the scoring marks. Now, since I have my pencil out, I'm just gonna go ahead and do it with the pencil. You can do it with your comb tool or some other tool for putting in scoring lines. Now flipping it, I'm gonna see if I can flip this over. There we go. Now, finish scoring the rest. Now, a little bit ago, you made yourself some new slip, and you're gonna be needing that a lot on these slab projects, so make sure that you all stay ahead of the game and have some ready for you when it's time. I'm gonna go ahead and put slip generously in these areas. You want to think about getting into all of those grooves. Your slip might be stickier, not as fluid as this. So I want to make sure that somehow the liquid of it gets into the grooves. That's the whole idea of putting the grooves in there. Scoring allows that slip somewhere to pool up, and it gives it more surface area to grab onto. So hopefully if I put enough slip on here on this top side, I don't have to put any on the bottom side where I put those other scoring marks, because it's really awkward to try to flip it and score at the same time. So I'm gonna go ahead and try this out now. Let's put one on top of the other one. And I might have to lift it in such a way that it's gonna connect on like that. Looks good. And I give it a little pinch. Look at it before I move on, see that I'm doing it neatly. If so, give it a little bit more of a pinch. Now I don't wanna deform the layer here. I want it to still be the same thickness. I don't want it to be right here where I push together that there's a big pinch mark. I want it to just be rubbed in. So I keep my hand behind it. So that way as I'm smoothing along, it creates a wall, almost like it's on the table. So I know that it's making great contact. I can feel that area underneath it. I don't want to peek at it right now because I'm likely to mess some of that up. So I'm just gonna move on to the next part. This one's ready to go. Same thing, I'm gonna kind of lift up both of them, get one to go under the other one. It should line up with those lines that I just put on there. Give it a good, easy pinching. Again, I don't want to deform it, so I'm just kind of lightly pinching it, but I want to make contact everywhere that I added that slip so it really gets into the grooves on the other piece or the other side. So now I'm going to do this one, same thing, and press it together just lightly. I can rub it in, but I don't want to lose the greatness of that edge there. It's a nice part of this piece, and so if I smush it really hard, it's just gonna look bad right there. All right, fourth one, make contact. It should ooze out a little bit. One thing about when you turn in your work, and I'm looking at pictures, you can usually tell if someone put enough slip because there's evidence that some of it oozed out there. If I see none of that, that means either you didn't put slip or you didn't put enough. So a little bit will ooze out, and then we need to seal it, which is actually rubbing that away so that it becomes neat. Now, my finger's not gonna do that without messing things up, so you can try out some different things. The card that I have, I'm gonna try that and see. That kind of works, but it also creates a shape that I'm not quite thrilled with, so let's look at my other tools. So in my kit, I happen to have the tool that we used on the coil vase, so I could cut wider lines, the bobby pin on the end, and I have the pencil type end. I happen to have a piece that looks like this. We put a variety of tools in everybody's, so yours might have something that works great. Another thing you can do is you can just look for some things like maybe some disposable plastic and cut it to shapes that you want it to be. So if I had something that came in plastic and I just cut that plastic up and make a shape with it, I can very well make my own tools of certain shapes. So I like this one because it's allowing me to have that 90-degree angle still, so that when I were to look down at it, I still see the walls, the two walls there, and I don't want to mess that up. It's a nice feature of this. So I'm gonna try this. I am not pushing very hard. One thing I'm doing is very, very lightly, just wiping away any extra slip that's there. So I'm just cleaning it up, so to speak. And then if there's any spots where there isn't slip that got in there, this will press it in and seal it. And so this is a step of sealing. All right, and so that worked pretty well. You can sometimes use some other tools. You could try using your pencil lightly. It at least works for that very edge. It doesn't really work for keeping that square edge, but try it out. You never know. And then I want to look at this very edge right where it seems to come in and meet the bottom of the bowl. And I just want to have that be a smooth transition. So I'm going to look it over. I don't like how there's like a little spot right there, a little rough spot where it was cut and not folded. And then I can go from there to, if you had wanted to wipe it away a little bit more, water is going to help you out, whether you're using it from a sponge or maybe just dip into it and just kind of wipe some water on. So really looking at that edge right now, making it as neat as possible. Everything we're doing, you want to focus on the quality of it at this point. If I say, oh, there's a little spot there, it's not a big deal, but it's also not hard to fix. So maybe I'll just do it instead of, cutting out early on it and saying good enough. Like, keep at it. Get it to a level that you're super proud of what you're doing. Like if someone were to come upon your work, they'd be blown away. They'd say, I didn't know that you were an artist. I didn't know that you were a potter. I didn't know that you were a ceramicist. And you just look at them and go, I am. I'm gonna try
adding a little slip to this edge here. It was really dry right there, just a little touch of slip, just for the sake of adding water. So that's another option too, if you want to add a touch of water to your piece, is to add it via slip. Now, if I don't want to mess up the shape, again, put your hand behind it to serve like a table. And everything I'm doing extremely lightly. I'm not pressing down hard. If you do, you'll stretch your clay out. And it's like a rubber band that is malfunctioned. It'll stretch out, but it won't bounce back. So I want to be very gentle. So now, if my first goal was to make sure that inside edge looked really good, now my goal is to make sure that this outside edge is really good. So I'm going to look over every edge of it. Again, don't cut out early, just really look it over. How careful can you be in getting all of your edges really neat? Okay, so now I want to be able to flip this over and look at the back side. Well, I don't want to try to stand it on its points or it'll all get ruined. So I got to find something that's going to be small enough to fit into here and tall enough that it's going to go above how tall this rim is. So look around and see what you can find. Okay, I looked around the room and I found this cup. It's actually from a frosting. And that would work because it's tall enough, but when I put it in the middle, it's touching the walls. So that's gonna mess up my shape. So I wanna find something smaller, so I had this little thing of spackling, and I liked how it had a small circle here, and it seems like it's tall enough, and I'm gonna check it now. Put the smaller circle down in here, not press it hard, I don't wanna make a mark. And it looks like it's clearly tall enough, so I'm able to flip it over. So I'm gonna hang on to this and see if I can get under this and give it all a flip over so I can see the back side, and then I wanna be able to set it down and pull my hands away. So now I can see all the stuff that's on the outside, or the back, or the bottom. And I'm gonna go ahead and fix all these spots too. I see where some slip did not get all the way to the edge there, so I'm gonna just get a little bit on there and just kind of swipe along that edge, just so it gets kind of pressed in there. I can see an area that I scored it, but I didn't end up covering it right there, and I don't like that, so I'm gonna add a little slip so it gets into those grooves too. Now I don't want to overdo it. I'm not going to soak this whole thing with slip, or what's going to happen is my clay will get softer and softer. It'll no longer be able to hold its form and it'll eventually cave in. Pretty sure you don't want that to happen. So I'm just putting a lot of extra slip in that corner, and then I'm rubbing it along so it slides into the empty space. So it looks better, stronger, all of that stuff. A little bit of slip. I'm gonna go ahead and use tools again. I could try using a pencil if I wanna do just that corner, just lightly. I'm barely pulling it along there, or I might try some of my other tools. Could try some things. You know, what would happen if I use a stick? Well, maybe. It's kind of big and awkward, so maybe not. I don't really like that. So I think I'll go back to something that I have better control over. Maybe it's this. And just like with the inside, once that line is good, I want to check the very edge where they seem to come together and check it out. Now, one advantage of me doing the inside or top of the bowl first is I know that's done. I know that I'm gonna need to check where my little can of spackle might be making a little mark here, so I'm gonna check that when I'm all done here and make sure that gets fixed up. But the rest of it should be good, so I plan on leaving it up on here for a little while. So now is a good time to put feet on this, and now is a good time to get initials on here.
So speaking of feet is not something that you're going to need on everything you make. It's just an option. So if I wanted to have this flat bowl, almost like a plate, and if I want to put it up on legs, I used slabs to cut little rectangles and put them on there. Great, I can do that. If you don't want to do that, you want to have it just flat on the bottom, just like bowls normally are. That's perfectly fine. It's just something to think about. It's an option for you if you decide that you want to do that.
Okay, so I've decided I'm not going to put feet on this bowl, So I'm just going to label it. So get your initials on there and then what class you are in. Before I flip it. Because once I flip it, I'm not going to see this area again. So it's my last chance to make it look good. It's much easier to work on when it's starting to be leather hard because you're not as likely to mess it up. And so being gentle is easier now. Okay, so there's that line that I knew was probably going to happen. So now I'm going to see if I can get rid of it. Now I could have padded it, put something that would have been soft over it, even a paper towel, piece of cloth, anything that could prevent that. So if you don't want to have to deal with a little ring at the end. Okay, the ring is gone. And now I will continue smoothing edges, softened corners. You can have them really sharp if you want, but one thing that you really want to do is have it consistent. So if you're going to do one of them really a sharp edge, then they should all be. Or if you're going to smooth it down, then they should all be. So I decided I'm going to give it a little bit of a smooth down. It still has flat sides and fairly sharp edges, but it has just a little bit rubbed off by using the sponge. Again, there's no water in this. It's like there's like a tiny bit of water, barely at all. If I add a bunch of water, it's going to be a whole different tool. So if it's not doing what you want, maybe you want a little bit more water. All right, come back in with this tool. And now when I'm doing this, because the clay is a little bit on the dry side, it's not super smooth when I'm doing this. And so I'm fixing some of like the larger problems, but I'm not necessarily finishing it when I do it because it's leaving a lot of stuff behind. And so getting in there, if I were to take the pencil, just lightly drag along there, not draw into it dark or hard. I could try doing this. I could try squishing it down into that spot right there and pulling along. Whatever it may be, I'm trying to make it look the best that I possibly can before I say it's done. One thing about being an artist is you get to call the shots and you get to decide when it's done. And so if you look at it and say, almost there, keep going. You know, no one says you must stop. You're the one that's saying you must stop. So if it's not good enough, it's probably a matter of you just decided to stop too early.
All right, well, this is cool. I really like it. I like how it turned out. I hope you really like what happens with yours. Of course, the form comes together fairly fast. It's just a matter of that neatness that really makes a difference. If you were going to say someone were to look at what you made and go, wow, you really want to like focus on all that stuff after it's joined together. It really makes a difference. But I'm very happy with how this turned out. So now it's time to let this dry. I'm going to fire this, get some glaze on here, and then I can actually use this later on for whatever I feel like using it for. So anyway, enjoy making your first origami bowl. See ya.